Whether you want to lower your MK8, improve the handling, or just watch me do some sketchy stuff that the internet says is an awesome DIY hack for suspensions, this video is for you. Lowering springs are going to be a popular modification for any car. Lowering your car can give you a lower center of gravity and a better look. Lowering springs can be stiffer than the stock ones, which can also lead to better handling characteristics as well. With a lot of spring options available, it can often be difficult to determine which one's the right one for you. There are two different kinds of springs on cars, progressive rate springs and linear springs. The main difference is going to be how the spring reacts when it's compressed. The stock springs on your car would use progressive rate springs, while race cars would use linear ones. Progressive rate springs are going to be softer as you initially compress them, but as you compress them further, it becomes stiffer. Linear rate springs are going to have the same tension as you follow all the way through the compression. What that translates to for you is that progressive rate springs are going to have a comfortable ride during average use. As you get to more aggressive driving situations, they compress more and it hits the stiffer part of the spring. Ultimately, if you're tracking a car, you're going to want a linear spring, but this is intended for race cars. If you have a car you're daily driving, you are going to want progressive rate springs so that you can not be miserable. This gives me a perfect opportunity to plug our site. If you're looking for parts for your MK8 or any VW or Audi, make sure you check out shopdap.com and we will link to MK8 Golf R and GTI Springs in the description below where you can check out all the options we have. Today we're going to be using racing line ones which drop this car 20 to 30 millimeters. Also, I know someone is thinking I am a race car boy, so I want the linear springs. And if that's what you want, we have that to offer for you. So if you want to be a no one wants to ride in my car boy, we got the springs for you. I know you came here to see before and after pictures of lowering springs on a MK8 GTI. So here, we're going to give that to you at the beginning of the video to save you the time. Here's our before, and then after our racing line spring install. Before, after. Now let's talk about the sketchy internet hack where you use lumber to work on a car. The 2x4 method is something I heard about from Facebook groups. This was specifically referring to Mark 7 stuff, which is very similar to the MK8 suspension. This is a method that has grown in popularity to the point where we're having to make this video. And just to check what the feedback from the Facebook groups were, I did this poll. And as you can see, many people still think this is a great idea. Hell no. To the no, no, no. The reason why people do this is to prevent them from having to disassemble more components on the car, mainly the axle or the steering knuckle or the ball joint or any of those components. So I'm going to test this out to see how sketchy it really is. When it comes to lowering springs, a lot of people ask if their stock shocks will function with the lowering springs. The stock springs of the car and the shocks are intended to function together, and the shocks are intended to function at the ride height of the factory springs. Lowering your car means that your shock absorber will have less overall travel. If you go too low, it will cause it to bottom out often. If you don't intend on slamming the car on the ground, the stock shocks can work with a sport spring of roughly around an inch or so drop. And something to be aware of is the stock strut bushings and bearings on top of the shock will take a little more abuse on a lowered car. You can add upgraded performance shock to improve the handling of your car as well to combine that with springs, something like Coney's or Bilstein's, but if you had a DCC car, I wouldn't recommend that. Some models have an upgraded DCC shock available, like this one here, but don't delete your DCC. That's silly. More on DCC in just a second. With modern day vehicles, installing a set of springs is not just installing a set of springs anymore. Xenon or LED headlights use sensors on the suspension to determine the ride height to make sure the headlights are pointing in the right direction. This MK8 GTI has DCC, which is dynamic chassis control. This means that the suspension in that car can electronically adjust to improve handling and performance. The way this works is the shocks have a control valve mounted to the side of them, which have the ability to control the flow of the shock oil. During more aggressive settings, the valve will change to restrict the oil flow more, making it more difficult to get through the valve. During softer settings, it's going to change to allow the oil to flow more freely through the valve, giving you a softer suspension. The springs we're using on this car are intended to work with DCC or standard suspension cars. This is a system that can be deleted if you were to upgrade to coilovers or shocks that didn't have them, but sometimes you need cancelers to prevent errors from going on your dash, and it's a really good suspension, so I wouldn't delete them unless you're planning on tracking the car. On DCC suspensions, there is a readaptation procedure which you can do to smooth out your ride again after a lowering spring install, which we will have a separate video on. And there also should be a readaptation, much like our headlight video we shot on our Audi S4, to adapt the headlights to the new ride height. Let's get into our install. Now this is really important, and you need to make sure if you're doing springs on any modern VW Audi, you don't break this. Right here is the range sensor for the headlights. This attaches to the control arm down here and then to the body of the car up here. That's a part that if you forget to unbolt it before you touch any suspension parts like springs, you could break it, and it's expensive, so don't do that. One on the front, one on the rear. Wait, two on the front, one on the rear on this car. Every car is different a little bit. Don't break them, because you're gonna get mad at me and you're gonna say it was my fault, but I warned you. Like the people who got mad at me on the Mark 7 video that our car didn't have range sensors because it was a non-xenon car, but they were still mad that I didn't take them off on the car that didn't have them on there in the first place. It was my fault. They broke their sensors. All right, so this is the bolt we're taking off on the backside, 10 millimeter. I'm also gonna unplug it too before I loosen this too much, because then this will move around too much on me. There we go. And then we're just gonna let it dangle. So I bet you're wondering, Paul, what's this wood you got here? You're doing car stuff, not carpentry. This is what the internet claims is the magic tool for springs on a car. So we're gonna try this 2x4 method that I consider to be a little on the sketchy side. So this 2x4 method essentially goes like this. The tool goes into the steering knuckle on the backside to loosen this knuckle up. You unbolt this link from the car, then you put a hole in this 2x4, you bolt it up to there, and you jack it up to push this strut assembly up out of the knuckle. This wood is getting in the way of this solenoid. So the 2x4 method would work much better if you didn't have this in the way, but because we have this solenoid in the way, I'm gonna have to like cut the wood at an angle. This, as you can see, I'm working on a lift. You're not gonna be working on a lift, but this is a lot of jacking I'm gonna be doing. This is not really a woodworking station. A vise works just great. This is a vise, not advice. This is a steel bit, and I'll be honest with you, I have no clue how much I'm cutting off, but we're gonna give it the old college try to start. Oh. If you don't know, this was the bit for stainless steel that we use for cutting our exhaust that cut through it very good. So let's see how it does on wood. If you look on the bottom side here, do not jack at this angle. If you're gonna do this dumb shit, don't do it like this. We're gonna unbolt both sway bar links. So I'm gonna take this nut off to get this link off all the way. You only need to do it on this side, because on the other side, I don't believe it has the same clearance issues because this tab is more accessible. All right, 14 millimeter triple square. We'll link to the triple square is available on our site. A lot of these bolts are one-time use. Somebody, mainly us, shopdap.com, has a listing by some of the popular cars like Mark 8s, Mark 7s, where you can look at suspension stuff and it tells you the torque spec in the hardware section of the suspension, and it also says whether they're one-time use or not. And we'll have it listed on that page where you can find all that information out. This bolt and nut is something that the people who I've seen talk about this use to bolt the 2x4 to the strut itself.
Now, is this easier than just doing it the other way?
I have no idea. Right now, I'm gonna be doing 30 minutes worth of woodworking, like I'm Bob Vila, instead of actually working on cars, which I could be doing. But I'm doing this for the people at home. Am I happy that I got sawdust all over my toolbox and the floor? No, not at all.
When's the shopdap.com
HGTV segment where we show you? Look at that cut. You think I didn't take wood shop with cuts like this?
Well, you use a stainless steel blade on a piece of wood.
Listen, did it cut it? We're going straight for the big bit. The biggest bit I got. Probably not big enough still, but like in life, if it's not big enough, all you can say is you're sorry. Which, I'm doing a terrible job. Should we use the concrete bit? That bit should be big enough. not a single woodworking tool was used in the making of this. Concrete bits work okay on wood.
And destroying toolboxes.
Well, it's my toolbox.
It looks like a makeshift zombie apocalypse weapon.
It could be. Is that a good angle? I don't like it, but it is what it is. Come with me, and you'll be in a world of OSHA violations. This is our strut spreader tool. As you can see, it has kind of a square shape to it, and this allows us to spread the strut knuckle open. So you insert it in to the strut and turn it until it hits the flat spot, like that. Before you start doing any more, you want to make sure you unplug this. So we're just going to push in on this tab, and then you kind of wiggle this down, like that. Once the strut spreader is in there, you should be able to wiggle the strut a little bit like this, and that will allow you to know this is loose. The only thing holding it now is going to be the stuff up top. All right, now we're going to put our wood in. So this situation, as suspected, this angle is a problem. I wouldn't recommend it. Don't do it. I'm going to flip around. We're going to call an audible and put this on the back side to try to show you that. But to do that, we got to take off this sensor from the bottom. So we're going to pop off our sweet arrow with these clips. Oh, and by the way, we'll link to these in the description because you're almost for sure going to break these if they have any amount of time on them. Oof. Oof.
Now we can do the wood thing.
Yay, wood!
You know, at this point, we could have just took the axle out.
Yeah, I know. I could have done this already, given the amount of time. We got to go back to the woodworking table. Is it a better angle? Sure. Is it a good angle? No. So the tab on this shock is probably hitting our strut spreader right now, so I'm relocating it to the bottom side so we can finish off our jacking with our 2x4. So as you can see, as I'm tapping this, it's slowly walking down from the pressure. So I would do this before you just keep jacking the thing like a psycho, because you could really hurt somebody that way. That's my biggest worry about everybody having this, is that this thing kicks out on you. So I really worry about that. That's exactly what I worry about for people, is that shit happening.
You just didn't do it right, all the comments say.
Oh, there's definitely gonna be comments saying I didn't do it right, but like, I mean, it did the job. So there's that. All right, let's go up top. Should we try it again on the other side and see if we can works better on the back side where we don't cut it? Oh, this is actually easier to deal with than the Mark 7s, just because it's more accessible. So these 313s are the only thing holding this thing in the car. So we're just going to loosen them up. We will drop this thing out of here. And we're out. The correct way to do this install would be to start with removing the ball joint nuts, remove the upper sway bar link nut, remove the pinch bolt from the steering knuckle, remove the inner axle bolts, and then spread our knuckle open. Then you can rock the steering knuckle assembly back and forth to have it walk down the shock assembly until it's completely off. If you would like to see a full version of the correct way to do it, we will link to that in the description below. Now let's remove our springs.
Any advice for the kids at home for spring compressors?
Stay in school, kids. So this is loose, as you can see by the movement here. So you can see it's moving independently on the bottom from the rest of the shock. So that spring, I consider it compressed. Yes. So this is a special tool that you would use to remove this nut. I'm going to use an impact to zing this off, but this is a tool that you would use if you didn't have impacts. So what it does is allows you to put this in there, and then you can put an Allen in there, and then you can hold it for the center of the shock and allow you to loosen this nut. So this is a 21 millimeter on the factory nut, which is the one you would use. So we'll link to that one in the description. We have a bunch of these. They run from 18, 19, 21, and 22, depending on different cars, and then also aftermarket ones use different sizes. When you're taking these nuts off, if you don't have this spring properly compressed, this thing will shoot back at you and potentially hurt somebody. So make sure your spring compressor is solidly on your spring before you do this. And again, is off. Just like that. I know you're wondering why I'm not using an impact on it. I'm also wondering the same thing right now. Safety first, just like you saw with that piece of wood. Fun fact about factory springs. These colors actually determine how you would get the correct spring to know you were getting the 100% the right spring. Is you would have, oh, red, white, and blue. That's America right there. They're not normally those colors.
It's an American spring.
But this one's from America. It says M-U-W, America. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're not made in America. Now would be an ideal time to replace your strut bushings and bearings on your car. If your car has any mileage to speak of, you should actually replace these, especially in places where they have salt, which, as you can see, our stuff's actually really salty right now, which is exceptionally rare here. If you have a creak from the front end of your suspension, it's almost always either the bushing or the bearings. If you're paying somebody labor to do this for you, this is not an inexpensive job, and the cost of the parts to then have it replaced again would be basically the same job all over again. And lumber is expensive right now. I'm putting letters facing downwards. So text down, and then you want to make sure you get it nestled into this bushing. So the bushing on the bottom where the isolator has kind of a seat here that wraps around, and you want to kind of sit it into the end there. So we're going to make sure we get it sat in the end, put our bushing back on. And obviously you have the spring compressor to come off. Usually with lowering springs, you can actually just push them down and thread the nut on by hand. So I'm going to do that now. And what you got to do is get it lined up like so, and then I'm going to push down like this and try not to shoot this back at Nathan. And then just thread it on like this. There we go. Tight. Torquing this down, same deal. This guy, put it on, hold with the Allen, and then you're going to keep snugging it up, and that's how you would torque this thing to the proper torque spec, which we're going to put on screen right now. This little notch here, it's kind of like a rubber little dingle hanging off the side here, that faces towards the body of the car. Not for the shock body, but actually for the orientation of these bolts up top. So when you do that, you want to make sure you turn it in and go towards the body when you're going to tighten these up. And what I would do is just get these threaded in, make sure that they're holding it up pretty good before you let it hang. This was kind of hanging up in the way, so what I did is I just put my foot on top to kind of push it down to allow that to get in while it was seated. Now, this tab at the back goes where that strut spreader tool goes, back here. So we're gonna get that orientation correct, and then we're gonna struggle to get this back in. Making sure you're getting in at the correct angle, because if you're going at the wrong angle, it's not gonna really slide in there very easily. So, given what we got going on, it needs to kind of push back like that. And as you can see, it kind of sat right down in there. And now we actually can use the jack. Oh, we don't even need to actually. Just lift it up. We actually can use the jack in just a second to allow us to get back all the way up. It needs to be tapped on up. Oh, balls.
What was that?
That was the shock clanging to the bottom. Were you rolling?
Yeah, but I don't know what I saw.
It doesn't matter what you saw. You heard the noise. And what happened was I was repositioning the strut spreader tool with some tension on the jack from underneath, And as I started to create an opening in the knuckle, it just shot right down and bottomed out. So good news is we know we're at the bottom.
We're installed.
We are all the way installed. So what we want to do, we're looking at the bottom of the shock right here, and this is the steering knuckle. You want to make sure that this lip right here doesn't have any gaps there, because if you see a gap between the shock and the body of the knuckle here, you know this is not down all the way. So you have to spread this back open and actually get it to sit down all the way.
Did we ruin our aluminum knuckle with the strut spreader?
Yeah, it didn't ruin it, but it did mar it up a little. That's what happens to these aluminum knuckles, is they get a little boogered up. Just to be clear, that is the official way you're supposed to do this in terms of spreading the knuckle, so that's what they do. All right, so we're putting our triple square back in that side, put that nut on, get this sway bar link on. I'm not gonna put it on the top side until the other side is finished, because something to keep in mind, you install this on there, it's pushing that sway bar down, which means you create tension on the sway bar on the other side. So you don't really want to have that tight on one side when you're trying to do the other. We're going to plug in our DCC, just like so. We'll put the torque spec on screen for this one right here, this nut right here, and this nut right here. Okay, so now we're going to reinstall our sending unit here for the level sensor. And there is a locating thing right here on the back side. This has a hole that it goes into up here. So if it's not in that hole, you know you're in the wrong place. Same deal, this one has this little tabby guy, and there's two holes side by side. So there's only one way they can go. This cover, just gonna pop these guys into that hole, and then you put the pins in to spread that open, and it's pretty simple. We're going for round 2 on the old wood method. We've recrafted a new piece of wood with our crafting table, and we're gonna take another shot at it to see if we can make this work better. And hopefully nobody gets hurt in the process.
Well, off camera, you said that you actually like this method.
I didn't say I like it. I said I understand why people like it. For amateurs, I see why this is a method that they like. It requires a lot less disassembly. I have concerns about it still. It is easier in some ways, for sure. There you go. Oop, 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 oop. I don't like that. I don't like that. See, this is where I worry for people, because now you're in a real bind. Now you got wires all pinched in here. See, this is exactly where I worry about people getting themselves in a bad spot. My biggest concern having people do this method is if something goes wrong, like just happened to me here, all of these wires and hoses are in the way. And if you don't know how to manage yourself working on a car, this could come out and rip either your brake lines out or all those wires out. So if you're gonna plan to try this method, be aware it's possible that could happen. If you put too much pressure with the shock on any of those wires or hoses, then you're gonna be in a real bad spot.
Boom.
Boom, boom, boom. Let me hear you say wayo. I don't know.
I don't know what my expectations were. We have a brand new Mark 8, the height of technology in 2022.
We're using pieces of wood to work on it?
Yeah.
Like we're a hobo in a circus trying to put together carnival rides? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Right. 2x4. Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention in terms of the location of the strut spreader, this is about the depth that allowed the entire tab on the strut to actually come up and through. So in the middle on the back part of this, you can see it's kind of stepped. You want to do on the back side, and then roughly about this depth, you can just make sure you look from the bottom to make sure the tab will clear when it comes up. I actually think I need to jack this thing up. I need to put this 2x4 back in this mother father. I need to compress this shock to get this thing back in, because this axle is too short. Not like the wrapper, but it is too short. If your wood's too long, you're gonna have a hard time getting it in here. But that's a problem for another person. See, the problem with this situation here that we got is if you're not careful, you probably could mess this axle up. If you pull too much pressure on this thing, you might pull that inner axle straight out of its hole. Really, if you look how stretched that inner boot is right now, it's more stretched than I'd like it to be. My face is very close by here. There we go.
Wow.
Oh, you see that? You see that? Did you see how easy that went? The problem with why this was having issues with going in is because the angle. And so as you're trying to jack it up with this, it creates some different points where it's leveraging and cocking the knuckle back like this, so this is not going in at a straight angle. So you got to kind of mess with it to get it in until you can get it at a straight angle, and then it's going to kind of sit down in place. Lastly, we're going to tighten these up and we'll put the torque spec on screen. So I'm putting this back together. I had to pop these. I had just kind of pulled them up as I realized this guy has to slide underneath here, and it was not cooperating. I couldn't get it under there, so I had to remove this completely. And if you look, there's these little barbs on there that stick into here. So I had to remove them. I kind of was able to get underneath from the bottom side, underneath here, to kind of pry with my finger against the side to release them from underneath. So that's kind of how I had to get in there. So this should be able to just slide in there like that. Just like that. Here we are in the rear. The rears are much easier. I'm going to remove this cover because we're going to be using a pole jack to push up and down on this control arm. 10 millimeter here, and we're going to remove both sides. It's those same stupid connector things that were on the front, except for now I can't see them. Aerodynamics.
Oh, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
Look at that guy.
Hey, would you just look at it? The good news is you do have to take these out. The bad news is you do have to take these out. They actually work pretty good at their job, but their job when it's in a place like this is it's inconvenient, I would say. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, they're off. They're off. But now we're going up again to finish working. First thing we do is take off our rear sensor, 2 T25 Torx. And then we can just kind of hang that out of the way. The only bolts we're going to be messing with here are going to be these 3 bolts. Sway bar link here, the shock bottom bolt here, and then the one that goes to this spindle right here. And you can take this 13 off from this side, and just a 13 and a 13. If you're using a ratchet when you just did that, you'd still be click, 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 click. But I just it out. All right, I am using a pole jack in this circumstance. If you are at home doing a DIY, you're gonna use a floor jack if you're on jack stands, and you wanna support underneath this control arm because the tension from the spring is gonna be pushing down on this. So you loosen this stuff and pull them out, you're gonna have a problem because it's gonna shoot down at you. You also might notice, if you are a very attentive person, the racing line springs are already in when we're disassembling this. That's because we lost the audio on the first go around, so we're doing it again because we're dumb.
At least you know how to do it already.
I do, thank God. I knew how to do this about 2 decades ago. So there's that. It's hammer time. Oh, oh.
Yeah.
Phillips head. And this is our last one. And we're out. So what you're gonna do is lower your stuff down, get this out of the way. There's not as much tension because this car is lowered already. Remember when I said we were dumb? Remember that part? So
Kind of my fault.
what you're gonna do is pull down, and then you can just pull your spring out. I really want to pull out this racing line spring again, but here I am. Here's a spring that we're gonna reinstall in just a second. And we're back. We're here to reinstall the spring. And you just pop that down. You are going to want to get it centered onto this bushing. And again, these spring isolators are something that you would consider replacing, just like the front stuff, if you have any mileage on the car. So at this point at home, you'll take your floor jack to jack it up, and then you're gonna make sure you kind of guide everything in place and make sure everything is lining up with its appropriate hole. All right, look at that. Look at that, how good that lines up. Okay, there we go. Now we're gonna keep going up. As you're doing this, you're gonna make sure that your spring is properly in there and also properly in the bottom here. If you see the hole on this doesn't quite line up, what you can do is stick a screwdriver in there and kind of tweak it around to get it to line up. And if it's not lining up on that side, you can put the screwdriver in the opposite side. See? Now that's all you gotta do. Like that. There we go. There we go. Now, this is the other side of that hole. And as you can see, that also doesn't line up. So what I'm gonna do is stick a pry bar in here and try to twist this control arm to line up like this. And then I can just bang it in like that. That's what you call experience. Because if you don't know how to do that, you just struggle with that for a really long time trying to get it lined up. But if you know what you're doing, you can just beep, boop, bop, and you're done. Beep, boop, bop. Now the last thing we need to get in is this bolt for this sway bar. So what we have is a bolt that doesn't line up currently. So you also want to take that, kind of wiggle it down. Again, that trick we just showed with the screwdriver, you can get a smaller screwdriver and stick it in to kind of get it in place on the other side. So the bolt's going to go in from this side here. That same screwdriver trick works real good. So stick a screwdriver in the other end and get it lined up. Now the screwdriver's touching this screw. As you can see, they're like touching tips right now. so, you know, I'm in now. Hammer time, part 2.
Wow.
All right, we're gonna tighten this up. Wrong way. And we will put the torque spec to that on screen. Now we're gonna snug up this one. Same deal, torque spec on screen now. Sway bar link, torque spec on screen now. Reinstall our sensor here, 2 T25s. I'll be quite honest with you, these really don't even need a torque spec, just don't snap them off like a complete Neanderthal. Torque spec's probably like 8 Newton meters or something like that. Now you can proceed to watch 2 days ago, Paul finish this install with the correct audio. We're gonna put this cover back on, just gonna kind of hook it up and over, and you should be able to just get it lined up in there. And then we'll pop these clips in first without the guy. Now we're gonna put our wheels on and we're done. The moment of truth. Do we get all the 2x4s out of there? How low can you go?
All right, that's pretty good.
We gotta settle still too, but the front is sitting pretty good. The rears are actually not as low as I would have expected, but it's still gotta settle. The weight's not in the rear, so I expect the rear would probably settle a little more. I like it. I like the front.
Front's pretty good.
Yeah, I like that fitment a lot. We gotta
Spacers.
do some spacing. So we will have some spacer testing we'll be doing for this, but I want to wait for this to settle. Then we're going to do some spacer testing. Stay tuned for that. Make sure she drives still. Hey, yo. Stance life.